Hey everyone, my name is Sarah, and last month my son Marcus turned 7. I never imagined that what should have been one of the happiest days of his year would become the moment I finally understood exactly where my family and I stood in my parents' eyes. But I guess there's something brutally clarifying about watching your child's face crumble when the people who are supposed to love him unconditionally show him just how little he actually means to them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. For as long as I can remember, I've been the daughter who tried too hard. Not because anyone ever asked me to, but because I desperately wanted to earn the same love and attention my older brother Derek seemed to get effortlessly. Derek was the golden child, charismatic, confident, and somehow always managing to land on his feet no matter how many times he screwed up. When he dropped out of college to pursue his music career, it was called following his dreams. When I graduated summa cum laude with my nursing degree, it barely got a mention at family dinner. Derek's now 32, still chasing those dreams while working part-time at a guitar shop, and living in a cramped apartment with his girlfriend Melissa and their 4-year-old son, Tyler. Meanwhile, I've been a registered nurse for 8 years, own my home in the suburbs of Millbrook Heights, and have been raising Marcus as a single mom since his father walked out when he was 2. You'd think that kind of stability and responsibility might earn some recognition, but in my family, Derek's struggles always seemed more important than my successes. My parents, Linda and Robert Hartwell, have always had this way of making excuses for Derek while holding me to impossibly high standards. When Derek needed money for rent, it was family helping family. When I asked for help with Marcus's daycare costs during my first year of nursing school, I was told I needed to learn to be more independent. When Derek got a DUI and needed bail money, Dad called it a learning experience. When I had to miss one family gathering because I was working a double shift at the hospital, Mom guilt-tripped me for weeks about not prioritizing family. But I kept trying. I kept hoping that maybe this time would be different. Maybe this birthday, this holiday, this family gathering would be the one where they finally saw Marcus and me as worthy of the same love they showered on Derek and Tyler. I organized every family dinner, remembered every birthday, sent thank you cards for every gift, and made sure Marcus was always perfectly behaved around his grandparents. I thought if I just tried hard enough, they'd eventually realize what they were missing. Marcus, my sweet, brilliant little boy, has always been sensitive to the family dynamics even though I tried to shield him from the worst of it. He'd notice when Grandma Linda would gush over Tyler's finger paintings but barely glance at his honor roll certificates. He'd see how Grandpa Robert would light up when Derek walked into a room but give him only distracted hugs. Still, Marcus adored his grandparents because children have this amazing capacity to love unconditionally, even when that love isn't fully returned. That's what made his 7th birthday so devastating. I had planned everything perfectly. Marcus had been talking about this party for weeks. He wanted a superhero theme, and I'd spent hours decorating our backyard with red and blue streamers, cardboard cityscape cutouts, and a custom cake shaped like his favorite hero's shield. I'd invited both sides of the family, his friends from school, and even splurged on hiring a local college student to dress up as Captain Thunder for entertainment. The party was in full swing when my parents arrived. I watched from the kitchen window as they got out of their car, and my heart sank. No gift bags, no wrapped presents, not even a card visible in their hands. They walked up to the backyard gate empty-handed, wearing those forced smiles they put on when they're doing something out of obligation rather than joy. "Happy birthday, sweetie." Mom called out to Marcus, giving him a quick hug before immediately turning her attention to Tyler, who was running around in his own little superhero cape. "Oh my goodness, Tyler, don't you look adorable?" "Derek, did you see how cute he looks?" Dad ruffled Marcus's hair absently while scanning the yard. "Nice party, Sarah." "Very elaborate." There was something in his tone that made it sound like a criticism rather than a compliment. I waited for them to present Marcus with his gift, but they just stood there making small talk with other adults. Marcus kept looking up at them expectantly, that bright 7-year-old hope shining in his eyes. My stomach started twisting into knots. Then Derek arrived with Melissa and Tyler, and everything changed. The transformation in my parents was immediate and dramatic. Suddenly they were animated, excited, showering Tyler with attention and praise. Dad swept Tyler up in a bear hug, spinning him around while Tyler giggled. Mom started taking dozens of photos, cooing over how handsome Tyler looked in his costume. "We have something special for you, buddy," Dad announced loudly, pulling out his wallet. He handed Tyler a crisp stack of bills that made my breath catch in my throat. $500 for our special little superhero. The yard went quiet. Other parents glanced around awkwardly. Marcus's face fell so completely that I felt something crack inside my chest. My 7-year-old son stood there watching his 4-year-old cousin receive more money than most adults carry in cash, while he hadn't received so much as a birthday card from the same grandparents. "Wow, Tyler's so lucky," one of Marcus's friends said innocently, and I wanted to disappear into the ground. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That's when it hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't an oversight. This wasn't forgetfulness or poor planning. This was a deliberate message, delivered with surgical precision on my son's birthday, in front of his friends and our entire extended family. My parents had made a choice to come to their grandson's birthday party empty-handed while bringing enough cash for their other grandson to make a scene. But the real revelation wasn't about the money. It was about the pattern I'd been ignoring for years. Every slight, every dismissal, every time they'd made excuses for Derek while criticizing me, it had all been building to this moment when they'd finally show their true feelings in a way so public and humiliating that there could be no doubt about where Marcus and I ranked in their priorities. Standing there watching my son try to process why his grandparents loved his cousin enough to give him a small fortune but couldn't even remember to bring him a birthday card, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The desperate, people-pleasing daughter who'd spent 30 years trying to earn their approval died in that backyard, and someone much sharper and more calculating took her place. That night, after all the guests had gone home and Marcus was finally asleep, I sat in my kitchen staring at the leftover cake and made a decision. I was done being the family doormat. I was done exposing my son to people who saw him as less than. And I was definitely done pretending that blood relation meant anything when it came without basic respect or love. They thought they were teaching me a lesson about my place in the family hierarchy. Instead, they just taught me something far more valuable, that sometimes the people who hurt you the most also hand you the exact motivation you need to build something they could never touch or take away. This is the story of how my parents' cruelty on my son's 7th birthday became the catalyst for the most empowering year of my life. The weeks following Marcus's birthday felt like living in a fog of suppressed rage and dawning clarity. I kept replaying that moment over and over, the casual way Dad had pulled out that money, the deliberate theatricality of it all, and worst of all, the confused hurt in Marcus's eyes as he tried to understand why he wasn't worth even a small gift from his grandparents. To understand how we got to that point, you need to know about the Hartwell family dynamic that I'd been navigating my entire life. My parents weren't overtly cruel people, they were subtly manipulative in a way that made you question your own perceptions. They had perfected the art of plausible deniability, always having just enough of an excuse to make you feel crazy for being upset. Mom, Linda, was the master of emotional manipulation disguised as concern. She had this way of sighing deeply whenever my name came up, as if my very existence was a burden she bore with saintly patience. "Sarah tries so hard," she'd say to relatives, with just enough emphasis on tries to plant the seed that my efforts were somehow desperate or misguided. She'd follow up with praise for Derek's natural charm or Tyler's effortless intelligence, never quite saying I lacked these qualities but always implying it. Dad, Robert, was more direct in his favoritism but equally skilled at making it seem reasonable. He owned a small but successful accounting firm in downtown Millbrook Heights, and he'd always talked about Derek eventually taking over the family business. Never mind that Derek had shown zero interest in accounting and could barely balance his own checkbook. Dad would say things like, "Derek just needs to find his passion first," while completely ignoring that I'd found mine in nursing and had built a stable, respectable career around it. The golden child himself, Derek, had mastered the art of failing upward. At 32, he'd never held a steady job for more than 18 months, had declared bankruptcy once, and had a string of half-finished projects that our parents always described as Derek exploring his options. His latest venture was trying to start a band called Midnight Reverie, with two other guys in their 30s who still lived with their parents. They played covers at dive bars on weekends and split maybe $200 a month between them. But Derek had something I apparently lacked: he made our parents feel needed. He called them with dramatic stories about his struggles, asked for advice he never followed, and painted himself as a misunderstood artist fighting against a world that didn't appreciate his talents. I, on the other hand, had committed the cardinal sin of actually getting my life together. I didn't need their money, their advice, or their rescue, and that made me less interesting to parents who defined their worth through their children's dependence. The favoritism had always extended to the grandchildren, but I'd tried to rationalize it away. Tyler was Derek's only child, I told myself, so of course they were excited about him. Tyler lived closer to them. Derek's apartment was only 20 minutes away while I lived 45 minutes across town. Tyler was also the baby of the family, barely 4 years old and still in that adorable phase where everything he said was cute. But Marcus's birthday had stripped away all my excuses and rationalizations. This wasn't about proximity or age or birth order. This was about a deliberate choice to value one grandchild's happiness over another's, and they'd made that choice as publicly and humiliatingly as possible. The aftermath was almost worse than the birthday itself. I waited for a phone call, a text, some acknowledgement that maybe they'd handled things poorly. Instead, I got silence for 3 days, followed by a casual call from Mom asking if Marcus had enjoyed his little party. It was fine, I said, my voice carefully neutral. Oh good. Tyler had such a wonderful time. He keeps talking about his special money from Grandpa and Grandma. Derek says he wants to put it in a savings account for him. Isn't that responsible? The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. She was actually bragging about the gift they'd given Tyler while pretending Marcus didn't exist. Mom, I said slowly, you didn't bring Marcus anything for his birthday. There was a pause, then that familiar sigh. Oh, Sarah, we've been so busy lately. Your father's been working such long hours, and we had that appointment with Tyler's pediatrician that morning. You know how Derek worries about Tyler's allergies. We meant to pick something up on the way, but the stores were all closed by the time we got there. It was such an obviously fabricated excuse that I almost laughed. The party had been at 2 in the afternoon on a Saturday. Every store in Millbrook Heights would have been open. But you brought Tyler $500 in cash. Well, that was different, she said, her voice taking on that defensive edge it got whenever she was caught in something she couldn't explain away. Derek mentioned that Tyler had been really good at his preschool lately, and we wanted to acknowledge that. It's not like we planned it, it was just a spontaneous gesture. Spontaneous. $500 in cash was spontaneous, but stopping at literally any store to buy a $7 birthday card for their other grandson was impossible due to busy schedules. Marcus noticed, Mom. He asked me why Tyler got money and he didn't get anything. Another sigh, this one longer and more dramatic. Sarah, you can't expect us to treat both children exactly the same in every situation. That's not how life works. Maybe instead of focusing on what Marcus didn't get, you should teach him to be happy for his cousin's good fortune. There it was, the signature Hartwell move. Turn the conversation around so that I was the problem. I was the one being unreasonable. I was the one teaching my child bad values by expecting basic fairness from his grandparents. You're right, I said, surprising her with my sudden agreement. Life isn't fair. And Marcus is going to learn that lesson very well from his family. I hung up before she could respond. That night, I sat Marcus down for one of the hardest conversations I'd ever had to have. He'd been unusually quiet since his birthday, and I could see him processing what had happened in that way children do when the adult world stops making sense. Mommy, he said, looking up at me with those serious brown eyes that reminded me so much of his father, did I do something wrong at my birthday? My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. No, baby. You didn't do anything wrong. Not ever. Then why didn't Grandma and Grandpa bring me a present? Even Tommy's little sister brought me something, and she's only 3. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. Sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt people's feelings, even when they don't mean to. Grandma and Grandpa love you very much, but they made a mistake at your party." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Tyler got a lot of money." "He did. That's more than I get for my whole allowance for forever." "You're right." Marcus looked down at his hands, fidgeting with the hem of his pajama shirt. "Am I not as good as Tyler?" That question hit me like a physical blow. My 7-year-old son was already internalizing the message my parents had sent, that he was somehow less worthy of love and attention than his cousin. "Marcus," I said, kneeling down to look him in the eyes, "you are exactly as good as Tyler. You are exactly as good as any other kid in the whole world. And anyone who can't see that is missing out on knowing an amazing little boy." But even as I said the words, I knew the damage was already done. My parents had planted a seed of doubt in my son's mind about his own worth, and no amount of reassurance from me could completely undo that. That's when I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. I could handle being the overlooked daughter, the one who tried too hard and never quite measured up. I'd been dealing with that my entire life. But I could not, let them do the same thing to Marcus. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to keep trying to earn their love and approval. I wasn't going to keep exposing Marcus to people who saw him as less than. And I definitely wasn't going to keep pretending that family obligation meant tolerating disrespect and emotional abuse. It was time to stop playing by their rules and start making some of my own. The first real confrontation came sooner than I expected. 3 days after that devastating phone call with Mom, Derek showed up at my house unannounced. I was in my scrubs, having just gotten home from a 12-hour shift at Riverside General Hospital, when I heard his familiar knock, 3 quick raps followed by 2 slower ones, a pattern he'd used since we were kids. Marcus was at my neighbor Mrs. Chen's house doing homework, which was probably for the best. I opened the door to find Derek leaning against my doorframe with that casual confidence he'd always carried, as if the entire world was just waiting for him to grace it with his presence. "Hey, sis," he said, flashing that charming smile that had gotten him out of trouble his entire life. "Mind if I come in? We need to talk." I stepped aside without a word, already knowing this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. Derek had never just dropped by to chat. He only showed up when he wanted something or when our parents had sent him to smooth over one of their messes. He walked into my living room, looking around with that barely concealed disapproval he always had for my choices. My house was small but comfortable, a 3-bedroom ranch style in a quiet neighborhood with good schools. I'd worked double shifts for 2 years to save up for the down payment, and every piece of furniture had been carefully chosen and saved for. But to Derek, it probably looked boring and suburban, lacking the artistic flair he thought made his cramped apartment superior. "Coffee?" I offered, more out of habit than hospitality. "Sure." He settled onto my couch like he owned it, stretching his arms across the back in that way men do when they want to take up as much space as possible. "Nice place." "Very stable." There was that word again, stable, said like it was somehow a character flaw. I poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from him in my favorite reading chair, maintaining some distance. "What's this about, Derek?" He took a sip of coffee and made a show of considering his words carefully. "Mom called me. She's pretty upset about your conversation the other day." "Is she?" "Come on, Sarah. You know how she gets when there's family drama. She's been crying to Dad about how you hung up on her, how you're being unreasonable about the whole birthday thing." I felt that familiar surge of anger mixed with disbelief. Unreasonable about what, exactly? About expecting my parents to acknowledge their grandson's birthday? Derek set down his coffee cup and leaned forward, switching to what I recognized as his reasonable big brother voice. "Look, I get it. You're upset that Tyler got money and Marcus didn't. But you're blowing this way out of proportion." "Am I?" "Yeah, you are. Mom and Dad didn't mean anything by it. They've been stressed about money lately, Dad's business has been slow, and they're trying to help me get the band off the ground. When they saw Tyler at the party, they just felt generous in the moment. The audacity of it was breathtaking. So they're too stressed about money to buy Marcus a birthday card, but they have $500 in cash to spontaneously give to Tyler? Derek shrugged, as if the contradiction was meaningless. Tyler's going through a tough time right now. The divorce was hard on him. What divorce? You and Melissa aren't even married. We broke up for a few weeks last month. It was really confusing for Tyler, and Mom and Dad wanted to cheer him up. This was news to me, but it was also irrelevant. Derek, it was Marcus's birthday party. Not Tyler therapy session. God, Sarah, listen to yourself. You sound so bitter. It's like you resent Tyler for being loved. That hit me like a slap. I don't resent Tyler. I resent the fact that our parents treat my son like he's invisible while showering attention on yours. That's not true and you know it. Really? When was the last time Mom called to check on Marcus? When was the last time Dad asked about his school or his friends or anything about his life? Derek was quiet for a moment, and I could see him trying to come up with an answer that didn't prove my point. They ask about him, he said finally, but even he didn't sound convinced. No, they don't. They ask about me, sometimes, usually to find out if I need help with anything so they can feel good about offering advice I don't want. But Marcus? He's just background noise to them. You're being paranoid. Am I? Tell me, Derek, what's Marcus's favorite subject in school? He blinked. What does that have to do with anything? Just answer the question. What's my son's favorite subject? Science, he guessed. Reading. He's reading at a 5th grade level and wants to be a writer. What's his best friend's name? Another pause. Look, I don't keep track of every detail of his life. Jaden. They've been best friends since kindergarten. What's Marcus afraid of? Sarah, this is ridiculous. Thunderstorms. He still sleeps with a night light because loud noises scare him. Now let me ask you something else. What's Tyler's favorite color? Blue, Derek answered immediately. What's his favorite food? Chicken nuggets, but only the dinosaur-shaped ones. What makes him laugh? Silly voices. He loves when I do my robot voice. I sat back in my chair, letting the contrast speak for itself. Derek knew every detail about his son's personality, preferences, and fears. But he couldn't answer basic questions about Marcus, despite seeing him at family gatherings for years. That's the difference, I said quietly. You love Tyler enough to pay attention to who he is as a person. Our parents love Tyler enough to learn what makes him happy. But Marcus? He's just Sarah's kid, an obligation they fulfill by showing up occasionally and pretending to care. Derek's jaw tightened. That's not fair. Mom and Dad have always treated both kids equally. $500 versus nothing is equal. It was one incident. No, it wasn't. The words came out harder than I intended. It was the most obvious example of a pattern that's been going on for years. Tyler gets birthday parties thrown by Grandma and Grandpa. Marcus gets invited to Tyler's parties. Tyler gets special outings and overnight visits. Marcus gets included when it's convenient. Tyler gets bragged about to their friends. Marcus gets mentioned as an afterthought. Derek stood up abruptly, running his hands through his hair in frustration. Jesus, Sarah, do you hear yourself? You're keeping score like some kind of psycho. I'm noticing patterns like someone who's finally tired of pretending they don't exist. Mom and Dad love both kids. No, Derek. They love Tyler. They tolerate Marcus because he comes with me, and they're not quite ready to cut me off completely. He turned to face me, and for the first time in the conversation, I saw something other than casual dismissal in his expression. There was a flicker of uncertainty, as if maybe some part of him recognized the truth in what I was saying. What do you want me to do about it? He asked finally. I want you to stop pretending this is all in my head. I want you to admit that our parents have favorites, and Marcus isn't one of them. And then what? You want me to tell them to love your kid more? That's not how feelings work. I want you to stop making excuses for them. I want you to stop gaslighting me into thinking I'm crazy for noticing how they treat my son differently. Derek sat back down, suddenly looking older and more tired than his 32 years. Sarah, what's the endgame here? You can't force people to feel differently about things. The endgame is protecting my son from people who make him feel worthless. The endgame is not pretending that blood relation means anything when it comes without basic respect or kindness. You're talking about cutting them off. I'm talking about not exposing Marcus to people who hurt him. Derek was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. When he looked up, his expression was serious in a way I hadn't seen since we were children. Mom's going to lose her mind if you stop bringing Marcus around. Then maybe she should have thought about that before she humiliated him at his own birthday party. And Dad will blame me for not talking you out of this. That's not my problem anymore. Derek finished his coffee and stood up to leave. At the door, he turned back to me with something that almost looked like respect in his eyes. You know, I always thought you were the easy one. The one who never caused problems. I was. But apparently being easy just made me easy to ignore. After he left, I sat in my quiet living room and realized something important had shifted. For the first time in my adult life, I'd stated my truth clearly and refused to back down when challenged. I hadn't tried to soften it or make it more palatable. I hadn't apologized for being upset or tried to find middle ground. And it felt powerful in a way I hadn't expected. That night, when Marcus came home from Mrs. Chen's house, he seemed lighter somehow. He chattered about his homework and his plans for the weekend, and I realized this was the first time since his birthday that he seemed like his normal, happy self. Maybe protecting him from their dysfunction was already working. The breaking point came 2 weeks later, and it wasn't even about money or gifts this time. It was about something much more fundamental, respect for my role as Marcus's mother. I had planned a quiet Saturday morning at home. Marcus had been invited to a sleepover at his friend Jaden's house the night before, so I was enjoying a rare moment of solitude, catching up on laundry and meal prep for the upcoming week. I was folding Marcus's school clothes when my phone rang. Mom's name appeared on the screen, and despite my better judgment, I answered. Sarah, honey, she said in that artificially sweet tone she used when she wanted something, I hope you don't mind, but I picked Marcus up from that sleepover this morning. My hands went still on the small t-shirt I was folding. You did what? I called Jaden's mother, such a lovely woman, by the way, and asked if I could pick Marcus up. I thought it would be nice for him to spend some time with his grandmother, and I wanted to take him shopping for some new clothes. He's growing so fast. The casualness of it made my blood pressure spike. Mom, you didn't ask me. Oh, sweetheart, I didn't think you'd mind. You're always saying I don't spend enough time with Marcus. I thought you'd be pleased. There it was, the classic deflection. Take my legitimate complaint about their favoritism and twist it into evidence that I should be grateful for any attention they gave my son, even when it completely undermined my authority as his parent. Where is he now? We're at Westfield Mall. Marcus is trying on some adorable outfits at Children's Place. You should see him in this little button-down shirt, he looks so handsome. I closed my eyes, trying to control my breathing. Mom, bring him home. Now. Don't be silly, we're having a wonderful time. Marcus was telling me all about school and his friends. Did you know he wants to write a book about dragons? Of course I knew that. I was the one who read to him every night, who listened to his elaborate stories about brave knights and magical creatures, who had bought him 3 different notebooks specifically for his writing projects. But apparently, this was news to his grandmother. I'm not asking, Mom. Bring him home. Her tone shifted, becoming cooler and more defensive. Sarah, I'm his grandmother. I have every right to spend time with my grandson. Not without my permission, you don't. That's ridiculous. We're family. Family doesn't mean you get to override my parenting decisions. Family doesn't mean you get to pick up my child without asking me first. There was a pause, and I could hear Marcus's voice in the background, excited about something. The sound made my chest tight, he sounded so happy, probably thrilled to finally have his grandmother's undivided attention. But the happiness was built on a foundation of disrespect for me, and I couldn't let that slide. Sarah, you're being unreasonable. I'm buying him clothes. What kind of mother complains about someone buying her child clothes? The kind of mother who expects basic courtesy and respect from her family. Fine, she said, her voice now openly irritated. We'll head home soon. But I think you need to examine why you're so threatened by Marcus having a relationship with his grandparents. She hung up before I could respond, leaving me standing in my living room holding my son's pajamas and shaking with anger. Threatened. As if protecting my role as Marcus's primary parent was some kind of insecurity rather than a fundamental boundary that any reasonable person would respect. I spent the next 2 hours pacing my house, checking my phone every few minutes, and rehearsing the conversation I was going to have when they returned. When I finally heard my mother's car in the driveway, I was ready. Marcus burst through the front door carrying 2 shopping bags and wearing a huge smile. Mommy. Look what Grandma bought me. He started pulling items out of the bags, shirts, pants, a new pair of sneakers, even a small backpack with his initials embroidered on it. That's wonderful, baby, I said, hugging him and trying to keep my voice light. Why don't you go put everything in your room and then wash your hands for lunch? As soon as Marcus disappeared down the hallway, I turned to face my mother. She stood in my entryway wearing an expression of smug satisfaction, clearly pleased with herself for the morning's activities. He had such a lovely time, she said. We should do this more often. No, we shouldn't. Her eyebrows rose. Excuse me? You don't get to pick up my son without my permission. You don't get to make plans for him without consulting me. And you especially don't get to circumvent me by calling his friends' parents directly. Mom's face shifted into that martyred expression I knew so well. Sarah, I was trying to do something nice for Marcus. I thought you'd appreciate having some time to yourself. I appreciate being treated like his mother instead of some obstacle you need to work around. That's not what I was doing. Then what were you doing? Explain to me how calling Jaden's mom to arrange pickup without mentioning it to me first is anything other than going behind my back. She sighed dramatically. You're making this into something it's not. I'm his grandmother. I love him. I wanted to spend time with him. What's wrong with that? Nothing's wrong with wanting to spend time with him. Everything's wrong with how you went about it. How should I have gone about it then? You never answer your phone when I call to make plans. That's not true. Isn't it? When was the last time you said yes when I invited Marcus over? I thought about it and realized she had a point, but not the one she thought she was making. Maybe there's a reason for that, Mom. Maybe it's because every time Marcus spends time with you and Dad, he comes home asking why Tyler gets different treatment. We don't treat Tyler differently. You bought Marcus clothes today. When was the last time you bought Tyler clothes? That's different. Tyler doesn't need clothes right now. He's 4 years old. 4-year-olds always need clothes. They grow constantly. Mom waved her hand dismissively. You're twisting everything around. I did something nice for your son, and instead of being grateful, you're attacking me. And there it was, the core issue laid bare. In her mind, I should be grateful for any attention she showed Marcus, regardless of how she went about it. My role as his mother was secondary to her desire to play grandmother when the mood struck her. I'm not attacking you, Mom. I'm setting a boundary. If you want to spend time with Marcus, you ask me first. You respect my schedule and my rules. You don't go around me to get what you want. And if I don't agree to those terms? The question hung in the air between us, and I realized this was the moment I'd been building toward since Marcus's birthday. The moment when I had to decide whether I was going to keep trying to make this dysfunction work or protect my son from it. Then you don't spend time with Marcus. Her face went white. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. Sarah, you can't use my grandson as a weapon against me. I'm not using him as a weapon. I'm protecting him from people who don't respect his mother. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her calculating whether I was bluffing. I wasn't, and something in my expression must have told her that. "You'll regret this," she said finally. "When you're older, when you understand what family really means, you'll regret pushing us away." "Maybe," I said. "But I won't regret protecting my son from people who make him feel like he's not worth as much as his cousin." After she left, Marcus came out of his room wearing one of his new shirts. "Where did Grandma go?" "She went home, sweetheart." "Are you mad at her?" I knelt down to his eye level, choosing my words carefully. "I'm not mad at Grandma for buying you clothes. I'm upset because grown-ups should talk to each other before making plans that involve children." He nodded solemnly, processing this in that serious way he had. "Like how you always ask Mrs. Chen before I go to her house." "Exactly like that." "Oh. That makes sense." And somehow, hearing my 7-year-old son understand a concept that his grandmother couldn't grasp made me feel both proud and heartbroken at the same time. That evening, as I helped Marcus organize his new clothes in his dresser, he looked up at me and asked, "Mommy, why don't Grandma and Grandpa come to my school things?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "Like, Jaden's grandparents came to his science fair presentation. And Emma's grandpa came to her soccer game last week. But Grandma and Grandpa never come to my stuff." I sat down on his bed, my heart aching for this observant little boy who noticed everything. "Would you like them to come to your things?" "I guess. If they wanted to. What if I told you that sometimes grown-ups show love in different ways? But Tyler's grandparents come to his stuff. Grandma and Grandpa are Tyler's grandparents too." There was no good answer to that observation because he was absolutely right. They made time for Tyler's milestones but never for Marcus's. They knew Tyler's schedule but had never asked about Marcus's activities. That night, after Marcus was asleep, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to keep making excuses for their behavior. I wasn't going to keep hoping they'd eventually treat Marcus with the same love and attention they showed Tyler. And I definitely wasn't going to keep exposing him to the confusion and hurt that came from having grandparents who saw him as an afterthought. It was time to stop playing by their rules and start protecting my son from people who didn't value him enough to even pretend to care about his life. The war was about to begin, but for the first time since Marcus's birthday, I felt like I might actually win it. The aftermath of my confrontation with Mom created an eerie quiet that lasted exactly 4 days. No phone calls, no surprise visits, no casual texts asking about Marcus. It was the longest stretch of silence I'd experienced from my family in years, and honestly, it felt like breathing clean air for the first time. Marcus seemed to sense the shift too. Without the underlying tension of managing his grandparents' expectations and disappointments, he was more relaxed at home. He spent hours working on his dragon stories, building elaborate Lego castles, and chattering about his plans for the upcoming school science fair. For those 4 days, I got a glimpse of what our lives could be like without the constant emotional minefield of family obligations. But I should have known the peace wouldn't last. The counterattack came through Derek, which made perfect sense. He'd always been their weapon of choice when they needed someone else to do their dirty work. This time, though, they'd armed him with something I hadn't expected, Tyler. I was loading groceries into my car after work on Thursday evening when Derek's beat-up Honda pulled into the spot next to mine. Tyler bounced out of the passenger seat wearing his favorite superhero cape, the one he'd worn to Marcus's birthday party, and immediately ran over to hug my legs. "Aunt Sarah," he squealed, looking up at me with those big brown eyes that reminded me so much of Derek at that age. "Daddy says we're going to see Marcus." My stomach dropped as Derek approached, wearing that sheepish expression he got when he knew he was about to do something I wouldn't like. "Hey, sis," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Mind if we follow you home? Tyler's been asking about his cousin all week." It was a masterful move, really. Use Tyler as both shield and weapon. I couldn't say no without disappointing an innocent 4-year-old, but bringing him along meant Derek could deliver whatever message our parents had sent him without me being able to respond honestly. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile for Tyler's sake. "Marcus will be excited to see you." During the short drive home, I tried to prepare myself for whatever conversation was coming. Derek wouldn't have shown up unannounced with Tyler unless our parents had sent him on a specific mission. They were probably hoping that seeing the cousins together would remind me of the importance of family unity, or some other manipulative nonsense. Marcus was thrilled when Tyler burst through our front door. Within minutes, they were racing around the backyard, Tyler's cape streaming behind him as Marcus showed off his new tree fort, a simple platform I'd built between 2 oak trees the previous weekend. Derek and I settled on the back patio with iced tea, watching the boys play while we danced around the real reason he was there. "They look good together," he said finally. "The boys, I mean. Tyler talks about Marcus all the time. They've always gotten along well." "Yeah, they have." Derek took a sip of his tea, then set the glass down with deliberate care. "Sarah, Mom told me about what happened the other day. About the shopping thing. Did she tell you the whole story, or just her version? She said you were upset that she picked Marcus up without calling first." "And?" Derek sighed. "Look, I get why you were annoyed. She should have called. But don't you think you overreacted a little?" There it was, the gentle gaslighting disguised as reasonable conversation. How exactly did I overreact? Well, threatening to cut them off from Marcus seems pretty extreme for something that small. It wasn't small to me. And I didn't threaten anything. I set a boundary. Derek glanced toward the boys, who were now attempting to build a blanket fort using Tyler's cape as a roof. "They're really worried, Sarah. Mom's been crying every night since your fight. Dad's talking about driving over here to apologize, even though he thinks you're being unreasonable." The manipulation was so obvious it was almost insulting. Paint Mom as the victim, suggest Dad was being the bigger person by considering an apology, and frame me as the unreasonable one for having expectations. "Derek, when was the last time Mom called to ask about Marcus's day at school?" "I don't know. That's not really the kind of thing she mentions to me." "When was the last time she attended one of his school events? Has he had school events recently?" "He had a reading showcase 3 weeks ago where kids shared stories they'd written. He was so proud. He read a story about a dragon who was afraid of heights but learned to fly anyway. I sent everyone in the family an invitation." Derek was quiet, probably realizing where this was going. "Mom didn't come. Dad didn't come. They didn't even call afterward to ask how it went. But the next day, Mom spent 20 minutes on the phone telling me about Tyler's finger painting from preschool." "Sarah. I'm not finished. Last month, Marcus won the spelling bee for his entire grade level. I posted about it on social media, sent photos to the family group chat, even called Mom directly to tell her. Do you know what her response was?" Derek shook his head. "She said, 'Oh, that's nice, honey. Tyler learned to tie his shoes yesterday.' Then she spent 15 minutes talking about Tyler's shoe tying technique." I watched Derek process this, saw the moment when he realized he couldn't explain away the pattern. "Look," he said finally, "maybe they're not perfect grandparents. But they love both kids. Do they? Or do they love Tyler and tolerate Marcus?" Before Derek could answer, Tyler came running over, his cape tangled around his legs and his face flushed with excitement. "Uncle Derek. Marcus showed me his story books. He writes really good stories." "That's great, buddy," Derek said, lifting Tyler onto his lap. "What kind of stories?" "Dragon stories. And night stories. And one about a magic tree that grants wishes." Tyler turned to me with wide eyes. "Aunt Sarah, Marcus is really smart." "Yes, he is," I said, my heart swelling with pride for my son. "Can Marcus come to my birthday party next month? I want him to bring his stories and read them to everyone." Derek and I exchanged glances over Tyler's head. Tyler's birthday party would undoubtedly be another showcase event for our parents, a chance for them to shower attention on their favorite grandchild while Marcus watched from the sidelines. "We'll see, sweetheart," Derek said carefully. After Tyler ran back to play, Derek looked at me with something that might have been understanding. "You really think they treat the boys differently?" "I don't think it," Derek. I know it. And more importantly, Marcus knows it. What do you mean? I told him about Marcus's questions after his birthday party, about his confusion over why Tyler had received such an elaborate gift while he got nothing. I explained how Marcus had started asking why his grandparents never came to his school events, why they never called just to talk to him, why Tyler seemed to be the only grandchild they bragged about to their friends. He's 7 years old, Derek. He's old enough to notice patterns, but not old enough to understand that it's not his fault. Derek was quiet for a long moment, watching Tyler help Marcus arrange action figures in their blanket fort. So what's the solution here? You cut off contact and Tyler loses his cousin? Tyler doesn't lose his cousin. You and I can arrange playdates that don't involve mom and dad. The boys can maintain their relationship without me having to expose Marcus to grandparents who make him feel inadequate. And what about mom and dad? They just never see Marcus again? They can see Marcus when they're ready to treat him with the same love and respect they show Tyler. When they're willing to learn about his interests, attend his events, and make him feel valued for who he is rather than just tolerated as an obligation. Derek stood up and walked to the edge of the patio, looking out at the boys playing. You know what's funny, he said finally. I always thought you had it easier with mom and dad. They never seemed to worry about you the way they worried about me. They worried about you because you gave them reasons to worry. They ignored me because I never caused problems. And now? Now I'm causing problems. And for the first time in my life, I don't care if they like it. Derek turned back to face me, and I saw something in his expression I'd never seen before, respect, maybe, or recognition. Mom's going to fight you on this, he said. She's not going to just accept boundaries and move on. She'll try to go around you, manipulate Marcus directly, turn other family members against you. Let her try. I'm not the desperate to please daughter I used to be. And Dad? Dad can choose whether he wants to be Marcus's grandfather or just Tyler's. But he can't be both while treating them like they have different value. Tyler's voice interrupted our conversation as he called out from the fort, Marcus. Tell me the story about the brave dragon again. I watched my son light up as he began weaving one of his elaborate tales, his hands gesturing dramatically as Tyler listened with rapt attention. This was what Marcus deserved, to be heard, appreciated, and valued for his creativity and intelligence. If his grandparents couldn't see what an amazing child he was, that was their loss. As Derek and Tyler prepared to leave an hour later, Derek pulled me aside. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I think you're doing the right thing. Marcus is a great kid, and he deserves better than being treated like an afterthought. It was the first time in my adult life that Derek had validated my perspective on anything, and it meant more than I expected. After they left, Marcus helped me clean up the backyard, chattering about how much fun he'd had with Tyler. Mommy, he said as we folded the blankets, Tyler really liked my stories. Of course he did. You're a wonderful storyteller. Do you think Grandma and Grandpa would like my stories too? The question hit me like a punch to the stomach. My son was still hoping for their approval, still believing that maybe if he was just good enough, creative enough, special enough, they'd notice him the way they noticed Tyler. I think your stories are amazing no matter what anyone else thinks, I said carefully. He nodded, accepting this non-answer with the resignation of a child who'd learned not to expect too much. That night, as I tucked him into bed, Marcus looked up at me with those serious brown eyes. Mommy, are you and Grandma having a fight? We're having a disagreement about how grown-ups should treat each other. Are you going to make up? Maybe someday, if Grandma learns to be more respectful. He considered this. Like how I had to apologize to Jaden when I broke his toy. Something like that. Okay. He snuggled deeper into his pillow. I love you, Mommy. I love you too, sweetheart. More than all the dragons in all the stories. As I turned off his light, I realized something important had shifted. I wasn't just protecting Marcus from their dysfunction anymore, I was teaching him that he deserved to be treated with respect, that his feelings mattered, and that love without basic consideration wasn't really love at all. The real battle was just beginning, but for the first time, I felt ready to fight it. The escalation came exactly 1 week later, and it was more calculated than anything I'd experienced from my family before. Mom had clearly been planning her next move, because what happened wasn't spontaneous anger or hurt feelings, it was strategic warfare designed to hit me where she knew it would cause maximum damage. It started with a phone call to my supervisor at Riverside General Hospital. I was in the middle of my shift, checking on Mrs. Rodriguez in room 314 who was recovering from gallbladder surgery, when my charge nurse, Janet, appeared in the doorway with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of confusion and concern that immediately put me on alert. "Sarah, can I speak with you for a moment?" she asked quietly. I followed her to the nurse's station, my mind racing through possibilities. Had I made an error with medication? Missed something in a patient chart? Janet had been my supervisor for 3 years, and she'd never looked at me like I was a problem that needed solving. "I got an interesting phone call about an hour ago," she said, lowering her voice so the other nurses couldn't hear. "From someone claiming to be your mother." My blood went cold. What did she want? She was concerned about your mental state. Said you'd been acting erratically lately, making threats against family members, and she was worried it might be affecting your work performance. The audacity of it knocked the breath out of me. "Janet, Hold on, let me finish. She also mentioned that you've been keeping your son away from his grandparents out of spite, and that she was concerned about your judgment as both a mother and a healthcare professional." I gripped the edge of the counter, trying to process what my mother had just done. She'd called my workplace, my livelihood, my professional reputation, and tried to plant seeds of doubt about my competence and stability. "What did you tell her?" Janet's expression softened slightly. "I told her that your work performance has been exemplary, that I've never observed any concerning behavior, and that personnel matters aren't discussed with outside parties, regardless of their relationship to the employee." Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by a rage so pure it made my hands shake. "Sarah," Janet continued, "I don't know what's going on with your family, but in my experience, when someone calls an employee's workplace with vague accusations of mental instability, it's usually because they're trying to create problems rather than solve them. Thank you for handling it that way. Is there anything I need to know? Any actual concerns about stress or family issues that might be affecting you?" I took a deep breath, trying to find words that wouldn't make me sound like the unstable person my mother had tried to paint me as. "I'm dealing with some family boundary issues right now. Nothing that affects my work, but my mother is not handling my independence well." Janet nodded knowingly. "Ah. One of those situations. Well, for what it's worth, your professionalism and patient care have been consistently outstanding. If she calls again, I'll be less diplomatic about protecting your privacy." The rest of my shift passed in a haze of barely contained fury. My mother had crossed a line I didn't even know existed. Going after my relationships, my parenting, even my personal happiness, all of that I could handle. But trying to sabotage my career? Attempting to paint me as mentally unstable to my employer? That was a declaration of war. When I got home that evening, Marcus was at Mrs. Chen's house working on a science project, which gave me the privacy I needed to make the phone calls I'd been planning during my entire drive home. I started with Derek. "She did what?" he asked when I explained what had happened. "She called my supervisor and tried to convince her that I'm mentally unstable and potentially unfit to be a nurse." "Sarah, that's insane. Even for Mom, that's crossing a major line." "Yes, it is." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to protect myself. And Marcus. By any means necessary." There was a pause. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm done playing defense. If Mom wants to escalate this into a real conflict, she's going to find out that I'm much better at strategy than she thinks. Sarah, don't do anything you'll regret." "The only thing I regret is waiting this long to stand up for myself." After I hung up with Derek, I called my attorney, the attorney who'd handled Marcus's father's child support case 3 years earlier. Amanda Mills was sharp, professional, and had no tolerance for family drama masquerading as legal issues. "Sarah, good to hear from you," Amanda said when her secretary put me through. "How's Marcus doing?" He's great, but I may need some advice about protecting both of us from my family. I explained the situation, the birthday incident, the unauthorized pickup, and now the workplace sabotage. Amanda listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. "The phone call to your employer is concerning," she said when I finished. "That could potentially constitute harassment or even defamation, depending on exactly what was said. Do you have any documentation?" My supervisor took notes. She was professional about it, but I think she recognized it as inappropriate. "Good. Here's what I want you to do immediately: document everything. Every conversation, every incident, every attempt to contact you or Marcus without permission. Dates, times, witnesses when possible. If this escalates further, you'll want a paper trail." "What about legal options?" "Right now, it's all borderline. But if they continue to interfere with your employment, attempt to contact Marcus directly, or make any threats, we can look at restraining orders. The key is documentation." "And if they try to claim I'm an unfit mother?" Amanda's voice became sharper. "Based on what you've told me, that would be a difficult case for them to make. You're employed, stable, own your home, have no history of legal problems or substance abuse. Their evidence seems to be that you won't let them ignore your parental authority, which isn't exactly compelling." After I hung up with Amanda, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks: control. For the first time since Marcus's birthday, I wasn't just reacting to their moves, I was planning my own. The next step was harder but necessary. I needed to have a conversation with Marcus about what was happening, age-appropriate but honest enough to prepare him for the changes that were coming. When Mrs. Chen brought him home an hour later, he was excited about his science project, something about plant growth and different types of light. He chattered enthusiastically while I heated up leftover pasta for dinner, his face glowing with the kind of pure happiness that reminded me why I was fighting so hard to protect his childhood. After dinner, as we settled on the couch for our nightly reading time, I broached the subject carefully. "Marcus, do you remember when I told you that grown-ups sometimes have disagreements about how to treat each other?" He nodded, cuddling closer with his favorite stuffed dragon. "Well, Grandma and Grandpa and I are having a bigger disagreement now. It might mean that we don't see them for a while." His face grew serious. "Are you not going to be a family anymore?" The question broke my heart because it showed how much he'd been thinking about this. "We'll always be family, sweetheart. But sometimes family members need space from each other when they can't agree on important things." "What kind of important things?" I chose my words carefully. "Things like how grown-ups should ask permission before making plans with children, and how grandparents should treat all their grandchildren fairly." He was quiet for a moment, processing this. "Is it because of Tyler's money at my birthday?" The fact that he was still thinking about that incident weeks later confirmed that I was making the right choice. "It's because of lots of things, including that. But mostly, it's because I want to make sure you grow up knowing that you deserve to be treated with kindness and respect. Even by family?" "Especially by family." Marcus nodded solemnly, then looked up at me with those wise brown eyes. "Will Tyler still be my cousin?" "Tyler will always be your cousin. And if you want to see Tyler, we can arrange that. This disagreement is between the grown-ups, not between you and Tyler." "Okay." He seemed satisfied with this explanation. "Can we read about the dragon who learned to be brave now?" As I opened his favorite book, I realized that Marcus was handling this transition better than the adults involved. He understood the concept of boundaries, of standing up for yourself, of not accepting poor treatment even from people who were supposed to love you. Maybe that was because, at 7 years old, his sense of fairness hadn't yet been corrupted by the complicated guilt and obligation that adults mistake for love. Later that night, after Marcus was asleep, I sat at my kitchen table and started the documentation Amanda had recommended. I wrote down every incident I could remember, starting with the birthday party and working forward. The pattern that emerged was even more disturbing when laid out chronologically, a systematic campaign to undermine my authority and make Marcus question his worth. The workplace phone call wasn't an escalation, it was confirmation that my mother viewed me as an obstacle to be eliminated rather than a daughter to be respected. As I wrote, I realized something that should have been obvious earlier: this wasn't really about Marcus at all. This was about control. My mother couldn't tolerate the idea that I'd grown into an adult who didn't need her approval or permission. By treating Marcus as her property rather than my child, she was trying to maintain power over both of us. But she'd made a critical error when she'd gone after my career. That move revealed her true intentions and gave me the documentation I needed to protect myself legally. More importantly, it had shown me that there was no level of harm she wouldn't inflict to get her way. The gloves were officially off. Tomorrow, I would start implementing the plan that had been forming in my mind all evening. A plan that would ensure Marcus's safety and my autonomy, while teaching my family that underestimating Sarah Hartwell had been their biggest mistake yet. They wanted a war. They were about to get one. But this time, I would be the one choosing the battlefield. The second wave of retaliation came through Marcus's school, and it was so brazenly manipulative that I almost admired the audacity of it. Almost. I was reviewing patient charts during my lunch break when my phone buzzed with a call from Elmwood Elementary. Mrs. Patterson, Marcus's second-grade teacher, had never called me during school hours before, so I immediately worried something had happened to him. "Miss Hartwell," she said, her voice carrying that careful tone teachers use when they're navigating delicate territory, "I wanted to give you a heads up about something unusual that happened today." My grip tightened on the phone. "Is Marcus okay?" "Oh yes, Marcus is fine. But I had an unexpected visit from his grandmother this morning. She came during our reading circle and asked to speak with me privately about Marcus's home situation." The blood drained from my face. Mom had gone to Marcus's school. She'd walked into his classroom and tried to plant whatever poisonous seeds she'd prepared about my fitness as a parent. "What did she say?" "Well, that's why I'm calling you." She expressed concerns about Marcus's emotional state, claimed he'd been acting withdrawn and anxious at home. She also mentioned that you'd been under significant stress and suggested that Marcus might benefit from spending more time with extended family. I closed my eyes, trying to control my breathing. The strategy was brilliant in its manipulation: present herself as the concerned grandmother, paint me as the stressed single mother, and position herself as the solution to problems she was actually creating. "Mrs. Patterson, what was your response?" I told her that Marcus has been an absolute delight in class. He's engaged, happy, interacts well with other children, and shows no signs of distress or anxiety. In fact, he seems more confident and relaxed in recent weeks than he has all year. Relief flooded through me. "Thank you. Miss Hartwell, in 23 years of teaching, I've learned to recognize when family dynamics are affecting a child's school performance. Marcus is thriving right now. Whatever changes you've made at home are working beautifully for him." After I hung up, I sat in the hospital break room feeling a mixture of rage and vindication. Mom's attempt to portray Marcus as damaged by my parenting had backfired spectacularly. His teacher had essentially confirmed that removing him from their toxic dynamics was improving his well-being. But the fact that she'd gone to his school, tried to undermine me to his teacher, and potentially confused or upset Marcus during his school day crossed every possible line. When I picked Marcus up that afternoon, he seemed his normal cheerful self, bouncing out of the building with his backpack dragging behind him and a hand-drawn picture clutched in his fist. "Mommy, look what I made in art class. It's our family." He held up a drawing showing two stick figures, one tall with yellow hair labeled Mommy, and one small with brown hair labeled Marcus, standing in front of a house with flowers in the yard. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. I love how happy we look." Mrs. Patterson said it was really good too. She said families come in all different sizes and they're all perfect as long as there's love. I wondered if Mrs. Patterson had made that comment in response to whatever Mom had said during her visit, a gentle way of reinforcing that Marcus's family structure was perfectly healthy despite whatever concerns had been raised. Did anything else happen at school today? Any visitors or surprises? Marcus climbed into his car seat, already focused on buckling himself in. Grandma came to visit during reading time. She talked to Mrs. Patterson for a long time. Did she talk to you too? A little bit. She asked if I was happy at home and if I missed seeing her and Grandpa more. My hands clenched the steering wheel. She'd questioned him directly, trying to elicit responses she could use as evidence of my inadequate parenting. "What did you tell her?" I said, "I'm really happy at home because we read stories every night and you helped me with my dragon book and we built the tree fort together." He paused, looking thoughtful. "She seemed kind of sad when I said that." Of course she did. Marcus's enthusiastic description of our home life directly contradicted the narrative she was trying to build about a stressed, overwhelmed mother and a neglected child. That evening, after Marcus went to bed, I called Amanda Mills again. "She went to his school?" Amanda's voice was sharp with professional outrage. "Sarah, this is escalating beyond family disagreement into harassment territory." "What are my options?" "Several. First, you can formally notify the school that your mother is not authorized to visit Marcus or discuss his education with staff. Most schools will honor that request from a custodial parent. Second, we can send your mother a cease and desist letter outlining exactly what behaviors need to stop. And if she ignores it? Then we have documentation of willful harassment, which strengthens our case for a restraining order if it comes to that. I want both. The school notification and the cease and desist letter. Done. I'll have the letter drafted by tomorrow morning." After hanging up with Amanda, I realized I needed to take one more step to protect Marcus from any future school incidents. I called Mrs. Patterson at home. "I hope you don't mind me calling," I said, "but I wanted to follow up on today's situation." "Not at all. I was hoping we could discuss it further." "Mrs. Patterson, my mother doesn't have permission to visit Marcus at school or to discuss his education with staff. I'll be sending formal documentation to the principal tomorrow, but I wanted you to know directly." "I understand completely. Between you and me, her visit felt very inappropriate. She was fishing for information about Marcus's behavior and academic performance in a way that seemed designed to find problems rather than understand his needs." "How did Marcus handle seeing her there?" "He was polite but not particularly excited. When she asked about his happiness at home, he lit up talking about your activities together. She seemed disappointed by his responses, which struck me as odd for a grandmother. Thank you for being protective of him. Miss Hartwell, I want you to know that Marcus is one of my favorite students this year. He's creative, kind, and clearly well cared for. Whatever family issues you're dealing with, please don't doubt that you're doing an excellent job raising him." The validation from Marcus's teacher meant more than I could express. This was an objective professional who saw my son every day, who had experience with hundreds of children and families, confirming that Marcus was thriving under my care. The next morning, I delivered the formal notification to Elmwood Elementary's main office. Principal Davidson, a kind but efficient woman in her 50s, reviewed the paperwork and assured me that my mother's name would be added to their restricted visitor list immediately. "Has this been an ongoing issue?" she asked. "It's recently escalated. I just want to ensure that Marcus's school day remains a safe, stable environment for him." "Absolutely. We take these situations very seriously. Your mother will not be permitted on campus without your written permission." When I got home from work that afternoon, Amanda's cease and desist letter was waiting in my email. It was 3 pages of legal language that boiled down to a simple message: stop interfering with my family, stop contacting my workplace, stop visiting my son's school, and stop attempting to undermine my parenting. Any further contact would be considered harassment. I printed it, signed the delivery confirmation request, and drove to the post office to send it certified mail. As I handed the envelope to the postal clerk, I felt a sense of finality. This letter would force my parents to make a choice: respect my boundaries or face legal consequences. There would be no more plausible deniability, no more claims of innocent misunderstandings. That evening, Marcus and I had dinner on the back patio, enjoying the warm October air while he told me about his science project on plant growth. He was testing whether plants grew better with natural sunlight, artificial light, or a combination of both. "The combination plants are winning," he said, carefully measuring water into tiny cups for each plant. "Maybe they like having choices." "That's a very wise observation," I said, struck by the metaphor. "Sometimes having choices makes everything better. Like how I get to choose what stories to write, and what books we read, and what games to play." Exactly like that. As I watched my son tend to his plants with scientific precision, I realized that removing my parents' influence from our lives was giving both of us something precious, the freedom to be ourselves without constantly managing other people's expectations and disappointments. Marcus was more creative, more confident, more joyful without the underlying tension of grandparents who saw him as less than. And I was rediscovering parts of myself that I'd suppressed in my desperate attempts to earn their approval. Later that night, as I was reading emails, my phone rang. Derek's name appeared on the screen. "Sarah, what the hell did you do?" His voice was tight with tension. "I protected my son and myself." "What's wrong?" "Mom got some kind of legal letter today. She's hysterical. Dad's talking about getting his own lawyer. They think you've lost your mind." The letter simply asked them to stop harassing me and interfering with Marcus's life. If they're upset about that, it's because they know exactly what they've been doing. She went to Marcus's school to help. She was worried about him. She went to his school to try to build a case that I'm an unfit mother. His teacher confirmed that Marcus is happy and thriving, which completely contradicted whatever story Mom was trying to tell. There was silence on the other end. "Derek, they called my workplace trying to get me fired. They went to my son's school trying to prove I'm damaging him. This isn't concern, it's sabotage." "But legal action? Against your own family?" "Legal protection for my family. Mine and Marcus's. Mom wants to talk to you. She says she can explain everything if you'll just listen. She's had multiple opportunities to explain. Instead, she's escalated. I'm done listening to explanations that are really just justifications for unacceptable behavior." "So that's it? You're cutting us off permanently?" "I'm enforcing boundaries. If they can respect those boundaries, we can eventually rebuild a relationship. If they can't, then they've made their choice." After Derek hung up, I sat in my quiet living room and realized something important. I wasn't sad about this decision. For the first time in years, I felt completely at peace with my choices. Tomorrow, they would receive the cease and desist letter. And then we'd see whether they were capable of change, or if their need for control was stronger than their love for their grandson. Either way, Marcus and I would be fine. We had each other, we had our home, and we had the freedom to build a life based on respect rather than manipulation. That was more than enough. The cease and desist letter detonated like a bomb in my family's carefully constructed world of denial and manipulation. The response came not through phone calls or surprise visits, but through something I hadn't anticipated, a full-scale family intervention orchestrated by my Aunt Carol, my father's sister who lived 2 hours away in Brookfield. Aunt Carol had always been the family mediator, the one who smoothed over conflicts and convinced everyone that blood was thicker than whatever grievances they were nursing. She was also one of the few people my father actually respected, which made her the perfect weapon for this particular battle. The ambush happened on a Saturday morning. I was in the backyard with Marcus, helping him document the progress of his science project plants, when the doorbell rang. Through the front window, I could see Aunt Carol's silver sedan in my driveway, and my heart sank. She never visited unannounced, which meant this was a planned intervention disguised as a casual drop-by. "Stay here and keep measuring your plants," I told Marcus. "I'll be right back." Aunt Carol stood on my front porch wearing her signature pearls and the concerned expression she'd perfected over 68 years of managing family drama. Behind her, looking uncomfortable but determined, stood my cousin Jennifer, Carol's daughter and Derek's contemporary in the family hierarchy. "Sarah, sweetie," Aunt Carol said, opening her arms for a hug I couldn't politely refuse. "I hope you don't mind us stopping by. I was in the neighborhood visiting Jennifer, and we thought it would be nice to see you and Marcus." It was a lie, of course. Jennifer lived in Portland, 3 hours in the opposite direction from Brookfield. They'd made a specific trip to execute whatever plan my parents had arranged. "Of course," I said, stepping aside to let them in. "Marcus is in the backyard working on a school project." As we walked through my living room, I noticed Jennifer taking in the details of my home with the kind of careful attention that suggested she'd been briefed to look for evidence of something specific. Instability, maybe, or signs that I was struggling to maintain our life without family support. Your house is lovely, Aunt Carol said, settling onto my couch with practiced ease. So clean and organized. You've always been good at keeping things together. There was something in her tone that suggested this was leading somewhere, a setup for contrast with whatever narrative she'd been fed about my recent behavior. Can I get you coffee? Water? Coffee would be wonderful, Aunt Carol said. Jennifer nodded her agreement, still scanning my living room like she was cataloging evidence. As I prepared coffee in the kitchen, I could hear them talking quietly in the living room. When I returned with the tray, they were both wearing expressions of practiced concern. Sarah, Aunt Carol began, I'm going to be direct because I care about you and Marcus too much to dance around this. Your parents are worried sick about you. Are they? Your mother called me in tears yesterday. She said you'd sent them some kind of legal threat, that you're keeping Marcus away from them, that you're not yourself lately. I set down my coffee cup carefully. Did she tell you why I sent that letter? She said there was some misunderstanding about Marcus's birthday party, and that things have spiraled out of control since then. A misunderstanding, I repeated. Is that what she called it? Jennifer leaned forward, her expression earnest. Sarah, we're not here to take sides or judge anyone. We're here because we love you and we're concerned about what this conflict is doing to the whole family. What it's doing to the family, I said slowly. Not what the family has done to Marcus and me. Aunt Carol reached across the coffee table to pat my hand. Sweetheart, families aren't perfect. We all make mistakes, say things we don't mean, handle situations poorly. But that's why forgiveness exists. That's why we work through problems instead of running away from them. The condescension was breathtaking in its completeness. Reduce weeks of manipulation, boundary violations, and deliberate sabotage to handling situations poorly, then frame my protection of Marcus as running away rather than standing up. Aunt Carol, what exactly did my mother tell you happened at Marcus's birthday party? She looked uncertain for the first time. She said there was some confusion about gifts, and that you were upset about the difference between what the grandchildren received. Confusion about gifts, I repeated. They gave Tyler $500 in cash and brought Marcus nothing. In front of his friends, at his own birthday party. That's not confusion, that's a deliberate message. Jennifer shifted uncomfortably. Maybe they just didn't realize how it would look. They didn't realize that giving one grandchild a fortune while ignoring the other grandchild on his birthday would look bad? Sarah, Aunt Carol said, her voice taking on that patient tone adults use with unreasonable children, don't you think you might be reading too much into this? Your parents love both boys. Sometimes things just happen without malicious intent. Then explain the pattern. Explain why Tyler gets birthday parties thrown by his grandparents while Marcus gets invited to Tyler's parties. Explain why they know every detail of Tyler's life but can't answer basic questions about Marcus's interests or achievements. Every family has dynamics. Explain why Mom called my workplace and tried to convince my supervisor that I'm mentally unstable. That stopped the conversation cold. Aunt Carol's face went pale, and Jennifer looked genuinely shocked. She didn't tell you about that part, I continued. She didn't mention that she called Riverside General Hospital and told my charge nurse that I was acting erratically, making threats against family members, and that my judgment might be compromised. Sarah, surely that's not. She also went to Marcus's school and tried to convince his teacher that he was being damaged by my parenting. Fortunately, Mrs. Patterson told her that Marcus has never been happier or more confident. The silence stretched between us, and I could see both women processing information that clearly hadn't been included in whatever story they'd been told. Even if that's true, Jennifer said finally, don't you think legal action is extreme? She's your mother, Sarah. She was probably just worried and handled it badly. She was worried, so she tried to get me fired? She was concerned about Marcus, so she attempted to build a case that I'm an unfit parent? Aunt Carol set down her coffee cup with shaking hands. There must be some explanation. There is an explanation. They can't tolerate that I've set boundaries, so they're trying to destroy my ability to maintain them. They want me dependent and desperate, so I'll accept whatever treatment they decide to give Marcus and me. But they're family, Jennifer said weakly. So are Marcus and I. But apparently, we're the expendable kind of family. Through the back window, I could see Marcus carefully watering his plants, completely absorbed in his scientific process. He looked peaceful, content, free from the anxiety that had shadowed him for weeks after his birthday party. Look at him, I said, nodding toward the window. He's thriving without their dysfunction. He's confident, creative, happy. He doesn't flinch when the phone rings anymore, doesn't ask why his grandparents don't love him as much as they love Tyler. Both women looked out at Marcus, and I saw something shift in their expressions. The cease and desist letter asks for one simple thing, I continued. Basic respect for my role as Marcus's parent. No unauthorized contact with him, no interference with my employment, no attempts to undermine my parenting. If that's too much to ask, then they've told me everything I need to know about their priorities. Aunt Carol turned back to me, her expression more thoughtful than when she'd arrived. Sarah, what would it take for you to be willing to work this out? Acknowledgement. A real apology, not an explanation of why their behavior was justified. Consistent, equal treatment of both grandchildren. And respect for my authority as Marcus's mother. And if they can't do that? Then they've made their choice, and Marcus and I will make ours. Jennifer glanced at her mother, then back at me. You really would cut them off permanently? I really would protect my son from people who damage his self-worth, regardless of their relationship to us. After they left, promising to talk to everyone and see if we can find some middle ground, I sat on my back porch and watched Marcus finish documenting his plant measurements. He was humming while he worked, a tuneless little song that meant he was completely content. When he finished, he came over and climbed into my lap, resting his head against my shoulder. Mommy, who were those ladies? Aunt Carol and your cousin Jennifer. They wanted to visit and see how we're doing. Are we doing good? I looked around at our backyard, the tree fort we'd built together, the garden where Marcus grew cherry tomatoes, the little table where he did his homework on nice days. We're doing great, sweetheart. I think so too, he said contentedly. Can we read the dragon book tonight? Of course. As we headed inside, I realized something important. The intervention had backfired. Instead of making me doubt my decisions, it had reinforced how right I was to protect this peace, this happiness, this simple joy that Marcus deserved to experience without the shadow of conditional love and manufactured drama. Tomorrow, Aunt Carol would report back to my parents. They would have to decide whether their need for control was stronger than their desire to know their grandson. But regardless of what they chose, Marcus and I would continue building our life together, a life based on mutual respect, unconditional love, and the revolutionary idea that family should make you feel better about yourself, not worse. We were doing more than surviving without them. We were thriving. The turning point came not through dramatic confrontation or legal battles, but through something far more powerful, Marcus's own voice. It happened 3 weeks after Aunt Carol's intervention, during what should have been a routine evening at home. I was grading some continuing education materials for my nursing certification while Marcus worked on his homework at the kitchen table. He'd been unusually quiet during dinner, picking at his food and giving short answers to my questions about his day. I'd chalked it up to typical second-grade moodiness, but as the evening wore on, his silence felt heavier. Marcus, I said, setting down my papers, is everything okay? You seem sad about something. He looked up from his math worksheet, his brown eyes serious in a way that reminded me he was far more perceptive than most 7-year-olds. Mommy, Tyler called me today. My blood chilled. Tyler called you? How? At recess. He had Uncle Derek's phone. He said Grandma told him to call me because she misses me and wants to see me. The manipulation was breathtaking in its sophistication. Use Tyler as an innocent messenger, make it seem like a child's spontaneous desire to connect with his cousin, all while delivering the emotional manipulation my parents couldn't deliver directly due to the cease and desist order. What did Tyler say exactly? Marcus set down his pencil and turned to face me fully. He said Grandma cries every day because I don't come visit anymore. He said she told him that you're keeping me away and it's making everyone sad. He asked why I don't want to see them. The cruelty of it took my breath away. They'd taken a 4-year-old child and filled his head with adult dysfunction, then used him to guilt my 7-year-old son about boundaries he didn't create and couldn't control. What did you tell Tyler? I told him I do want to see him, but I don't understand why Grandma didn't bring me a present at my birthday but gave him lots of money. Marcus's voice got smaller. Tyler said maybe I wasn't good enough for a present. The world went red around the edges. Tyler said what? He said that's what Grandma told him. That some kids get presents when they're really good, and some kids have to wait until they're better. I had to grip the edge of the table to keep from screaming. They hadn't just manipulated Tyler into calling Marcus, they'd poisoned a 4-year-old's mind with the toxic idea that love and gifts were earned through goodness, creating a hierarchy where Tyler was inherently more deserving than Marcus. Marcus, look at me. I waited until his eyes met mine. That is not true. You are good enough for every present, every bit of love, every ounce of kindness in the world. Tyler's grandparents, our grandparents, made a choice that had nothing to do with how good you are. But why would they tell Tyler that? How do you explain to a 7-year-old that some adults are so damaged by their own need for control that they'll sacrifice children's emotional well-being to get their way? Some grown-ups say things that aren't true when they're angry or confused. That doesn't make the things they say real. Marcus nodded slowly, but I could see the seed of doubt they'd planted taking root. Despite all my efforts to protect him, they'd found a way to wound him using his own cousin as the weapon. That night, after Marcus was asleep, I made 2 phone calls that would change everything. The first was to Amanda Mills. They used Tyler to circumvent the cease and desist order, I explained. Had him call Marcus at school to deliver guilt and manipulation disguised as a child wanting to see his cousin. That's incredibly sophisticated manipulation, Amanda said grimly. And potentially damaging to both children. We can strengthen our case significantly with this. I want a restraining order. Not just for harassment, but for psychological abuse of a minor. They're damaging Marcus's self-worth and using another child as their weapon. I'll file the paperwork tomorrow. With the school incident, the workplace harassment, and now this manipulation of children, we have a strong case. The second call was harder but necessary. I called Derek. Sarah, thank God, he answered on the first ring. Mom's been beside herself since that legal letter. She just wants to talk to you, to work this out. Derek, Tyler called Marcus today. At school. Using your phone. Silence. Did you know about this? Tyler asked if he could call his cousin. I didn't think it was a big deal. What did Mom tell Tyler to say? Another pause. She might have mentioned that she missed Marcus and wanted to see him. She told Tyler that Marcus wasn't good enough for birthday presents. That some children have to wait until they're better to deserve gifts. She didn't. Sarah, that's not what she meant. That's what Tyler told Marcus. That's what a 4-year-old boy now believes about love and worthiness, and what my 7-year-old son had to hear about himself. Derek was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, smaller, less defensive. Jesus, Sarah. I didn't know she'd said that to Tyler. This isn't about miscommunication anymore, Derek. This is about psychological damage being inflicted on children. Both of them. What are you going to do? I'm filing for a restraining order. For Marcus and for me. And I'm documenting everything for potential family court intervention if they don't stop using Tyler as their messenger. Family court? If they're poisoning Tyler's understanding of love and worthiness, someone needs to protect him too. Even if his father won't. The line went dead. 2 days later, the restraining order was granted. A judge reviewed the evidence, the workplace harassment, the school interference, the manipulation of children, and determined that my parents posed a credible threat to Marcus's emotional well-being. They were legally prohibited from contacting either of us directly or indirectly, including through third parties. The order was served on a Thursday afternoon. By Friday morning, my phone was ringing constantly with blocked numbers. I let them all go to voicemail, creating a digital paper trail of their violations. The messages started angry and escalated to desperate. "Sarah, this is ridiculous. We're your parents. You can't keep our grandson away from us with some piece of paper. We love Marcus. Everything we did was because we love him. You're destroying this family." Each message was forwarded to Amanda, each violation documented and filed. But the call that broke my heart came from Tyler. Somehow, he'd gotten access to a phone again, and his little voice on my voicemail was confused and scared. "Aunt Sarah? Daddy's really sad and Grandma keeps crying. Did I do something bad when I called Marcus? I just wanted to talk to him. Please don't be mad at me." A 4-year-old child was now carrying the weight of adult dysfunction, blaming himself for the consequences of his grandparents' manipulation. That night, I sat Marcus down for the most important conversation we'd ever had. "Sweetheart, you know how we talked about grown-ups needing space when they can't agree on how to treat each other?" He nodded. "Well, a judge agreed that Grandma and Grandpa need to give us space right now. They can't call us or visit us until they learn how to treat us with respect." "What about Tyler?" "Tyler didn't do anything wrong. He's just a little boy who was told to say things by grown-ups. But we need to protect ourselves, which means we can't talk to Tyler right now either." Marcus considered this carefully. "Will Tyler think I don't want to be his cousin anymore?" "Maybe for a while. But someday, when you're both older, you can explain that you always loved him and wanted to be his cousin. And if Grandma and Grandpa learn to be nice, then maybe we can try again. But only if they can treat you the way you deserve to be treated." "How do I deserve to be treated?" I pulled him into my lap, holding him close. "Like you're the most important person in the world. Like your feelings matter. Like you're smart and kind and creative and worthy of all the love anyone could give." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he looked up at me with those wise brown eyes. "That's how you treat me. That's how everyone who loves you should treat you." As I tucked him into bed that night, Marcus asked one more question. "Mommy, are you sad that we can't see them anymore?" I thought about it honestly. Was I sad? Or was I relieved that the constant anxiety, the walking on eggshells, the desperate attempts to earn unearnable approval were finally over? "I'm sad that they couldn't love us the way we deserve to be loved," I said finally. "But I'm happy that we're safe now." "Me too," Marcus said, snuggling deeper into his pillow. "Can we read about the dragon who found his real family tomorrow?" "Of course." As I turned off his light, I realized that Marcus had found his real family. It wasn't big or complicated or traditional. It was just the two of us, building a life based on respect, kindness, and unconditional love. And that was more than enough. The restraining order had given us legal protection, but more importantly, it had given us peace. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt like we could breathe freely. The war was far from over, but we'd won the most important battle, the right to exist without their dysfunction. Everything else would build from there. 3 months into our court-ordered peace, something unexpected happened. I started building the life I'd always wanted but never thought I deserved. Without the constant drain of managing my parents' expectations and protecting Marcus from their toxicity, I had energy I'd forgotten existed. It began with small changes. I started saying yes to opportunities one would have previously declined out of family obligation or guilt. When the hospital offered me a chance to lead a new patient care initiative, I accepted immediately instead of worrying about how the increased responsibility might affect family gatherings I no longer attended. When Marcus's teacher suggested he join the school's creative writing club, I signed him up without second-guessing whether it would conflict with visits to grandparents who no longer visited. The transformation in Marcus was even more remarkable. 3 months of stability had unlocked a confidence in him that I'd never seen before. He started raising his hand more in class, volunteered to read his stories aloud during writing time, and made friends with kids he'd been too anxious to approach before. His teacher, Mrs. Patterson, called it a complete blossoming. But the real change came when I least expected it, through a conversation with my neighbor Mrs. Chen. I was picking up Marcus from her house after a late shift when she invited me to stay for tea. Mrs. Chen was in her 70s, a retired social worker who'd raised 4 children and had the kind of calm wisdom that comes from decades of helping families navigate crisis. "Sarah," she said as we sat in her cozy kitchen, "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but Marcus seems like a completely different child than he was 6 months ago." "Different how?" "Lighter. More himself, if that makes sense. Before, there was always something careful about him, like he was trying not to take up too much space. Now he fills whatever room he's in with his personality." She was right. Marcus had stopped apologizing for normal childhood behavior, stopped asking if it was okay to be excited about his accomplishments, stopped shrinking when adults entered conversations. "You seem different too," Mrs. Chen continued gently. "More present. More you." That observation hit me harder than I expected. I'd been so focused on protecting Marcus that I hadn't realized how much of myself I'd reclaimed in the process. "Mrs. Chen, can I ask you something? As someone who worked with families professionally?" "Of course. Do you think I did the right thing? Cutting off contact completely?" She set down her teacup and looked at me with those kind, knowing eyes. "Sarah, in 40 years of social work, I learned that some relationships are toxic enough to damage children's fundamental sense of self-worth. When that happens, protection isn't just appropriate, it's necessary. But they're his grandparents. Titles don't create entitlement to damage children. Being a grandparent is a privilege that comes with responsibilities. If someone can't meet those responsibilities, the title becomes meaningless." Her words gave me permission to feel something I'd been afraid to acknowledge: relief. Deep, profound relief that the constant vigilance was over, that I could focus on building rather than defending. That weekend, I made a decision that would have been impossible under my parents' influence. I enrolled Marcus in Saturday art classes at the community center, something he'd wanted to do for months but I'd hesitated about because it conflicted with traditional family visiting time. Watching him in his first class, completely absorbed in painting a watercolor landscape, I realized how many of his interests I'd unconsciously restricted to accommodate people who never showed genuine interest in nurturing his talents. The art teacher, a young woman named Elena who specialized in working with gifted children, pulled me aside after the second session. "Marcus has exceptional spatial intelligence and storytelling ability," she said. "Has he had formal art training before?" "No, just what they do in school. I'd like to recommend him for our advanced youth program. It's designed for children who show particular promise in creative fields." 6 months ago, I would have worried about how the time commitment might affect family obligations. Now, I simply asked about enrollment procedures. But the most significant development came through an unexpected source: Derek. He showed up at my house on a Thursday evening in November, looking haggard and older than his 32 years. I almost didn't answer the door, worried about violating the restraining order, but something in his posture suggested this wasn't about delivering messages from our parents. "I'm not here for them," he said immediately when I opened the door. "I need to talk to you about Tyler." I let him in, noting how he looked around my living room with something that might have been envy. "Tyler's been asking questions," he said, settling heavily onto my couch. "Hard questions. About why some kids get birthday presents and others don't. About why love has to be earned. About why Marcus doesn't come around anymore." "What have you told him?" I've been trying to explain that it's complicated, that grown-ups sometimes disagree about things. "But he's 4, Sarah. He doesn't understand complicated. He just knows that his cousin disappeared and somehow it's connected to him getting money and Marcus getting nothing." Derek ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from childhood when he was overwhelmed. "The other day, he asked me if he could give some of his birthday money to Marcus so Marcus wouldn't be sad anymore. The innocence of it broke my heart. Tyler, at 4 years old, had recognized the injustice and wanted to fix it in the only way his little mind could imagine. "What did you say?" I told him it was sweet but complicated. But then I started thinking about how we got here, about the pattern Mom and Dad created. Derek looked up at me. "Sarah, I think you were right." "About what?" "About everything. The favoritism, the manipulation, the way they treat Marcus differently. I've been watching more carefully since the restraining order, and it's obvious once you're looking for it. He told me about incidents I'd never witnessed, how our parents dismissed Tyler's interest in books because boys should be more active, how they criticized his sensitivity and tried to push him toward more traditionally masculine activities, how they praised him for traits that made him useful to them while discouraging qualities that made him think independently. They're not better grandparents to Tyler, Derek said quietly. They're just using him differently. You protected Marcus from becoming their project. I didn't protect Tyler, and now he's confused about love, worth, and fairness in ways that are going to affect him for years. The realization that both children had been damaged by my parents' dysfunction was devastating, but Derek wasn't finished. I want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me, he said. If I could guarantee that Mom and Dad would stay out of it, would you be willing to let Marcus and Tyler maintain their relationship? I considered this carefully. How would that work? Supervised visits. Just you, me, and the kids. Neutral locations. I'd be responsible for making sure Tyler doesn't carry messages or repeat things he's heard from Mom and Dad. Why would you want that? Derek's expression was more serious than I'd ever seen it. Because Tyler loves Marcus, and I think that love is healthy for both of them. Because I want Tyler to have at least one family relationship that isn't based on performance or conditional approval. And because I'm finally realizing that you've been the best parent in this family all along. The admission hung between us, loaded with years of unspoken competition and comparison. I'd need ground rules, I said finally. Clear boundaries about what topics are off limits, consequences if those boundaries are violated, and your commitment that this wouldn't become a way for our parents to access Marcus indirectly. Done. That Sunday, we met at the Children's Museum in the next town over. The reunion between Marcus and Tyler was everything I'd hoped and feared, pure joy complicated by the confusion of separation they couldn't fully understand. But watching them together, seeing how naturally they fell back into their easy friendship, I realized something important. I could protect the healthy relationships while still maintaining boundaries against the toxic ones. Marcus deserved to have a cousin who loved him unconditionally. Tyler deserved to have a cousin who valued him for who he was rather than what he could provide. And both boys deserved to learn that family could be chosen and shaped rather than simply endured. As we left the museum, Marcus asked if we could see Tyler again soon. I think so, I said. Uncle Derek and I are working out how to make that happen regularly. Without Grandma and Grandpa? Without Grandma and Grandpa. Marcus nodded, accepting this in that matter-of-fact way children have when adults give them honest, age-appropriate information. That night, as I tucked him into bed, he looked up at me with those thoughtful brown eyes. Mommy, I think Tyler's happier when it's just us two. He was right. Without the pressure of performing for grandparents who had their own agenda, both boys had been more relaxed, more genuinely themselves. Maybe that was the real victory, not just protecting Marcus from dysfunction, but creating space for healthy relationships to flourish without toxic interference. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt like we were building something positive rather than just defending against something negative. And that felt like the beginning of something much bigger than survival. It felt like the beginning of the family we actually wanted to be. The climax of our family war didn't come through dramatic confrontation or legal battles, but through something far more devastating to my parents: complete irrelevance. By spring, 6 months after the restraining order, Marcus and I had built such a fulfilling life that their absence wasn't a void to be filled, but simply empty space we'd grown around. The realization of their powerlessness hit them when Marcus won the regional young writers competition for his grade level. His story about a dragon who discovered that his real family was the group that accepted him as he was, rather than the one he was born into, earned him a $500 prize and a feature in the local newspaper. The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus had earned the exact amount of money my parents had given Tyler, but he'd done it through his own talent and hard work. I posted about his achievement on social media, as any proud mother would. The response was overwhelming: teachers, neighbors, friends from work, even parents from Marcus's school that I barely knew, all celebrating his accomplishment. Mrs. Patterson shared the post with a comment about how proud she was to have Marcus in her class. Elena from the Arts Center shared it too, adding that Marcus was one of the most talented young storytellers she'd ever worked with. But the most meaningful response came from Derek. He drove over that evening with Tyler, bringing a small cake and a card that Tyler had decorated himself. "This is amazing, Marcus," Tyler said, throwing his arms around his cousin. "You're like a famous writer now." Derek pulled me aside while the boys celebrated. "Sarah, I need to tell you something. Mom and Dad know about the contest." My blood chilled. "How?" "Someone at Dad's office saw the newspaper article and mentioned it. Mom spent an hour calling people to try to find out how she could contact the newspaper to, I don't know, claim some credit or insert herself into the story somehow." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Of course she did. The newspaper told her that all communication had to go through you as Marcus's parent. She lost her mind when she realized that Marcus had achieved something significant and she had no way to be part of it." "Good." Derek looked at me with something that might have been admiration. "You really don't miss them at all, do you?" I considered the question honestly. 6 months ago, I would have felt obligated to say I missed them, to express some sadness about the broken relationship. Now, looking at Marcus laughing with his cousin, secure in his accomplishments and his worth, I felt only satisfaction. "I miss the idea of what they could have been," I said finally. "But I don't miss the reality of what they were." That reality became even clearer when Derek told me about their latest schemes. "They're trying to go through Aunt Carol to arrange some kind of accidental meeting with you and Marcus," he said. "They want her to invite you both to a family gathering without mentioning that they'll be there. Carol won't do that. She learned her lesson after the intervention failed. They're also talking about showing up at Marcus's school events. Dad thinks the restraining order doesn't apply to public places where they have a legitimate reason to be." This was exactly the kind of boundary testing behavior I'd expected. They were probing for weaknesses, looking for ways to force contact without technically violating the court order. "Let them try," I said. "Amanda's prepared for that. Any attempt to use public events to circumvent the restraining order will result in criminal charges." Derek shook his head. "I don't understand how they can't see that this is all backfiring. Every scheme they come up with just proves why you were right to cut them off." But I understood it perfectly. My parents weren't trying to repair our relationship, they were trying to reassert control. Marcus's success without their involvement was proof that they weren't necessary, and that was unbearable to people who'd built their identities around being indispensable to their children's lives. The truth of this became even more apparent when Derek told me about their response to Tyler's evolving questions. "Tyler asked Mom why Marcus doesn't come to Christmas anymore," Derek said. "Instead of giving him an age-appropriate explanation about grown-ups having disagreements, she told him that you're keeping Marcus away because you're jealous of how much they love Tyler." The manipulation was so twisted it took my breath away. Use a 4-year-old's natural confusion to poison his understanding of the situation while simultaneously making him feel guilty for being loved. "What did you tell Tyler?" "I told him that sometimes families need space from each other, and that it has nothing to do with how much anyone loves him." "But Sarah, she's damaging him with this stuff. He's starting to feel responsible for Marcus not being around." This was exactly what I'd feared, that their need to be right would override any concern for the children's emotional well-being. "Derek, you need to make a choice about Tyler's exposure to them." "I know. I've been thinking about it. Melissa and I are talking about moving to Portland, closer to her family. Tyler would still see Mom and Dad, but it wouldn't be the daily drama it is now." The fact that Derek was considering relocating to protect his son from our parents' dysfunction showed how much his perspective had changed since this all began. But the most significant development came through an unexpected channel: my work. The patient care initiative I'd been leading had caught the attention of the regional medical center, and they offered me a promotion that would make me the youngest nursing supervisor in their system. The position came with a substantial salary increase, excellent benefits, and the kind of professional recognition I'd never imagined possible. When I told Marcus about the opportunity, his response was immediate and enthusiastic. "That's amazing, Mommy. You'll be the boss of helping sick people get better." His uncomplicated joy in my success reminded me of something important. This was how family was supposed to work. Celebrating each other's achievements without jealousy or competition, supporting dreams without conditions, taking pride in accomplishments without trying to claim credit. The promotion also meant we could afford to move to a larger house in a better school district, something that would have been impossible under the financial and emotional drain of managing my parents' dysfunction. When Derek heard about the job offer, his reaction was telling. Mom and Dad are going to be furious that you're succeeding without them. Good, I said. Maybe it'll finally convince them that we never needed their approval to build a good life. But even as Marcus and I thrived, I remained vigilant about their potential interference. Amanda had prepared comprehensive documentation of their behavior patterns, and we developed protocols for handling any future violations of the restraining order. The preparation proved necessary when they made their most desperate play yet. A week before Marcus's 8th birthday, I received a certified letter addressed to both Marcus and me. The return address was my parents' house, and inside was a formal invitation to a family reconciliation gathering to celebrate Marcus's special day in the way families should. The invitation was legally meaningless. They couldn't force us to attend anything, but it revealed how distorted their thinking had become. They genuinely seemed to believe that sending an invitation would somehow obligate us to participate in their fantasy of reconciliation. I forwarded the invitation to Amanda, who added it to our growing file of evidence, then did something that felt deeply satisfying. I threw it away without responding. Marcus never even knew about it. Instead, we celebrated his 8th birthday with the family we'd chosen, Derek and Tyler, Mrs. Chen, Elena from the art center, and 3 of Marcus's closest friends from school. The backyard party was everything his 7th birthday should have been, focused entirely on making him feel loved and celebrated. As I watched Marcus blow out his candles, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about his happiness, I realized something profound. We hadn't just survived my parents' toxicity. We'd transcended it. Marcus was growing up knowing his worth wasn't conditional on other people's moods or agendas. He understood that love was something you could count on, not something you had to earn through perfect behavior. He was confident in his talents, secure in his relationships, and free to become whoever he wanted to be. That night, as I tucked him into bed, Marcus looked up at me with those wise brown eyes. "Mommy, this was the best birthday ever." "What made it special?" "Everyone was happy for me. Like, really happy, not pretend happy." The distinction he'd learned to make between genuine and performative affection showed me that protecting him had been the right choice. He could recognize authentic love because he'd experienced enough of it to know the difference. "You deserve people who are really happy for you," I said. "I know," he said simply. "And I have them." As I turned off his light, I reflected on how far we'd come. A year ago, I'd been desperately trying to earn my parents' approval while protecting Marcus from their dysfunction. Now, I was building a career I loved while raising a son who knew his value wasn't negotiable. The war with my parents was essentially over, not because we'd defeated them, but because we'd made them irrelevant. They could scheme and manipulate and test boundaries all they wanted, but they had no power over a life they weren't part of. Marcus and I had won by building something better than what we'd left behind. And tomorrow, we'd keep building. 2 years later, on a crisp October morning, I stood in the kitchen of our new house making Marcus's favorite pancakes while he practiced his acceptance speech for the state young writers competition. At 10 years old, he'd already published 3 short stories in a children's literary magazine and was working on his first novella about a family of dragons who chose their own clan based on shared values rather than blood relations. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. "Mommy," Marcus called from the living room, "do you think I should thank Mrs. Patterson in my speech? She's the one who first encouraged me to enter contests." "I think that would be lovely," I called back, flipping a pancake shaped like a dragon. "She'd be honored to know how much her support meant to you." This was our life now, organic conversations about gratitude and recognition, celebrations of achievement without the underlying tension of managing other people's reactions, simple joy in Marcus's growing confidence and success. The transformation had been so complete that when Derek called with unexpected news about our parents, it felt like hearing about strangers rather than family. "Sarah," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "I wanted to let you know that Mom and Dad are getting divorced." I set down my spatula, genuinely surprised. In 32 years, I'd never seen a crack in their united front, never witnessed them disagreeing on anything more significant than dinner plans. Really? What happened? Apparently, Dad blamed Mom for the whole situation with you and Marcus. Said her interference and manipulation caused the family to fall apart. Mom blamed Dad for not supporting her efforts to fix things. They'd been fighting about it for months. The irony was perfect in its completeness. They'd spent 2 years trying to reassert control over Marcus and me, and in the process had destroyed their own relationship. How's Tyler handling it? Better than expected, honestly. He's 9 now, old enough to understand that his grandparents argue a lot and make people sad. He actually asked if he could spend more time with you and Marcus because they're happier people. Out of the mouths of babes. Tyler, at 9, had recognized what my parents never could, that happiness was a choice, and we'd chosen to build our lives around peace rather than drama. Of course he can spend more time with us. Marcus would love that. There's something else, Derek said. Mom tried one last manipulation. She called me crying, saying that if you would just bring Marcus to see her one time, she'd stop fighting with Dad and they could save their marriage. What did you tell her? I told her that your family's well-being isn't responsible for fixing her marriage, and that if their relationship couldn't survive without access to Marcus, then it wasn't worth saving. The evolution in Derek's thinking over the past 2 years had been remarkable. He'd gone from enabling our parents' dysfunction to actively protecting his son from it, and eventually to recognizing that healthy boundaries benefited everyone involved. How did she take that? About as well as you'd expect. She's now telling everyone who'll listen that both her children have turned against her because we're ungrateful and selfish. I laughed, but it was the laughter of relief rather than bitterness. Let her tell that story. Anyone who knows us will see through it. And that was the truth. Our community, Marcus's teachers, our neighbors, my colleagues at work, the families we'd connected with through his various activities, had watched us build a stable, loving life together. They'd seen Marcus flourish, witnessed my professional growth, observed how genuinely happy we both were. My parents' narrative of us as ungrateful children who'd abandoned loving grandparents simply didn't align with the reality that everyone could see. The final validation came through an unexpected source, Aunt Carol. She showed up at our door 3 days after Derek's call, looking older and more tired than when she'd attempted her intervention 2 years earlier. "Sarah," she said when I answered the door, "I owe you an apology." I invited her in, curious about what had changed her perspective. "I spent Christmas with your parents," she said, settling into our living room and looking around at the family photos on the walls, pictures of Marcus at various award ceremonies, vacation shots from our trip to the beach, candid moments of pure happiness that decorated our home. "It was difficult," she continued. "They spent the entire week complaining about how you'd poisoned Marcus against them, how Derek had turned into a traitor, how their lives had been ruined by ungrateful children. But Sarah, what struck me was how they never once asked about Marcus's well-being. Not about his school, his interests, his friends, his achievements. It was all about what you'd done to them, never about what they might have done wrong." She paused, looking directly at me. "2 years ago, I thought you were being stubborn and unforgiving. I thought family meant working through problems no matter what. But listening to them last week, I realized they're not trying to work through anything. They're just trying to be right." "And Marcus?" I asked them about his writing, about the awards he's won. They dismissed it all as you showing off and insisted that none of his achievements would have happened if they'd been part of his life. Aunt Carol shook her head. "They can't even take pride in their grandson's success because acknowledging it would mean admitting you made the right choice in protecting him." Her words confirmed what I'd known for 2 years but hadn't wanted to admit. My parents were incapable of change because they couldn't accept responsibility for their actions. "I'm sorry I tried to pressure you into reconciliation," Aunt Carol said. "You did exactly what you needed to do to protect Marcus, and he's clearly thriving because of it." After she left, I found Marcus in his room working on his novella, completely absorbed in crafting dialogue between characters who were learning to trust each other despite their differences. "How's the story coming along?" I asked, sitting on the edge of his bed. "Really good. The main character just figured out that you don't have to keep trying to earn love from people who don't know how to give it. He can choose his own family instead. The wisdom in his words, spoken so matter-of-factly by a 10-year-old, reminded me of how much we'd both learned through this experience. That sounds like a very wise character. He is. He's brave too. It takes courage to walk away from people who hurt you, even if they're supposed to love you. That evening, as Marcus and I sat on our back porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. 3 years ago, I'd been desperately trying to earn my parents' approval while protecting Marcus from their dysfunction. Now, I was the youngest nursing supervisor in the regional medical center's history. Marcus was a published author working on his second book, and we had a chosen family that celebrated our successes without conditions or competition. "Mommy," Marcus said, leaning against my shoulder, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if Grandma and Grandpa had been nice to us?" "Sometimes." "What do you think would have happened?" "I think we'd still be happy, but maybe not as happy as we are now." "Why not?" "Because we wouldn't have learned that we're strong enough to take care of ourselves. And we wouldn't have figured out that real family is the people who make you feel good about who you are." The profound truth of his observation took my breath away. Marcus had learned lessons about self-worth, healthy relationships, and personal strength that many adults never master. He understood that love wasn't something you earned through perfect behavior, but something you recognized through consistent actions. More importantly, he knew that he deserved to be treated with respect and kindness, and he had the courage to walk away from relationships that didn't meet that standard. As we headed inside, Marcus stopped at the family photo wall in our hallway, pictures of him with Tyler, with his friends from school, with Elena and Mrs. Patterson, with Derek, with Mrs. Chen. A chosen family built on mutual respect and genuine affection. "You know what I realized," he said, studying the photos. "We didn't lose a family when we stopped seeing Grandma and Grandpa. We just made room for a better one." That night, as I tucked him into bed, Marcus asked the question that had become our nightly tradition: "What was the best part of today?" "Watching you practice your speech and seeing how confident you are about sharing your writing with the world." "What was your best part?" "Right now. Talking with you before bed, knowing that you feel safe and loved and proud of who you are." "Me too," he said contentedly. "I love our life, Mommy." "I love our life too, sweetheart." As I turned off his light and headed to my own room, I realized something profound. We hadn't just survived my parents' toxicity or overcome their manipulation. We'd built something beautiful from the ashes of that dysfunction, a life based on respect, authenticity, and unconditional love. Marcus was growing up knowing that his worth wasn't negotiable, that healthy relationships required mutual respect, and that family was defined by choice and care rather than blood and obligation. And I had learned that protecting the people you love sometimes means having the courage to disappoint the people who claim to love you. 3 years ago, my parents had sold my son's worth for $500 and a power play. They thought they were teaching us a lesson about family hierarchy. Instead, they taught us the most valuable lesson of all, that we deserved better than anything they were willing to give. And in learning that lesson, we found everything we'd ever really needed. Each other, and the freedom to build a life worthy of the love we shared. The war was over. We had won. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.